All right, rosebuds, let's begin. Slowly, respectfully, and by respectfully, I mean with the exact amount of shade this deserves. Pause. Because Aisha Curry sat down, polished it up, softened the edges, clarified the old comments, and somehow still managed to remind everybody of the original sting to her husband, Stephen Curry. Girl, that is a talent. Now, the cleanup version is I was young. I had a no athletes rule. I didn't think I was his type. It just came out wrong. And yeah, it was disrespectful. Fine. Okay. Cute, neat, tidy, packaged. Put a bow on top. But let's not play dumb here because the part people remember is not the explanation. It is the insult. It is always going to be the insult, Aisha. And the insult, however you season it, was still Stephen Curry was not the guy she was checking for like that. Stephen Curry, not a dusty man on a folding chair outside a gas station, not a man with 3 baby mamas and a podcast microphone on TikTok, not a community peacock with no health insurance. She is talking about Stephen Curry, people. So naturally, the public hears that and says, oh, so you needed us to know that you were the prize. Girl, bye. Because that is what this really sounds like, a performance of superiority, a little velvet coated ego massage, a feminine way of saying, let the record show I was not easy to impress. And baby, that is where the irritation lives, right there. And that little polished museum of unnecessary information. Because why do women do this? Why, after getting the husband, the children, the family brand, the empire, the security, the image, the adoration, why is there still this itch to let the audience know? But just so we're clear here, I was the chooser. A little Jada Pinkett Jr., so to speak. That is the part. That is the frickin' disease. That is the drag. You got the ring, you got the name, you got the life, but you still wanted the higher seat in the story. And that is why people side eye it, because it is never just honesty, it's hierarchy. It's that King Nene bullshit. It is that soft little female flex where a woman publicly lowers a man by a half inch just to make herself feel 1 inch taller, not a mile, not a foot, just enough to let the world know I was not gagging over him. Girl, we can tell. That is the problem. And let's talk about the loophole women get. Because if a husband sat on a major platform and said, well, my wife really wasn't my type back then. Oh, they would drag that man like a busted suitcase through every app on this internet. He would be called emotionally abusive, narcissistic, cold, dismissive, immature, cruel. There would be a licensed therapist stitching up the clip by lunchtime. But when a woman does it, it's somehow framed as vulnerability, reflection, growth, teenage insecurity, softness, healing. But no, Sometimes shade is just freaking shade, even in pretty lip gloss. And that is what makes this so delicious, right? Because Aisha herself basically admitted it was disrespectful, which means the read wrote itself. Thank you, sister. You saved everybody time. But what fascinates me is how often modern women want credit for two opposite things at once. They want the public to admire their husband and also admire their reluctance to admire him. They want the fairy tale, but also the ego of the reluctant queen. They want the good man, the stable man, the disciplined man, the talented man, the faithful man, the family man. But then they still need one line in the script that says, "Don't get it twisted, baby. He had to convince me." Convince you of what exactly? That water is wet? That Steph Curry might be a catch? Ma'am, this is not a man selling incense outside of a train station. This is Stephen Curry, a generational talent, a polished public image, a provider, a husband, a cultural golden boy. And you still wanted us to know you were unconvinced? That is not romance. That is branding. And yes, 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 before somebody clutches a moral pearl and faints in the comments, she said she was young. She said she doubted herself. She said she thought she was not his type. Understood, received, filed away in the rose filing cabinet. But insecurity does not magically become harmless because it is feminine. Sometimes insecure women wound men in public and call it self protection, the audacity. Sometimes they lower a man before he has the chance to reject them. Sometimes they rewrite the origin story so they never look like the one who wanted more. That is not always healing. Sometimes that is just preemptive disrespect in a satin dress. And poor Steph, well, not poor, because he is rich, moisturized, successful, beloved, and spiritually sponsored by every middle class marriage fantasy in America, including mine. But still, Steph did what good public husbands are trained to do. He smiled through it. He took it. He stayed gracious. He kept the family image clean, never looked wounded, never make the woman look cruel is what he did, because men are expected to absorb those little humiliations elegantly, and that is part of the generation performance too. A good man is supposed to laugh off what would become a federal case if the roles were reversed. And that is why this keeps resurfacing, Aisha, because people are not reacting to a teenage rule. They are reacting to a pattern you seem to keep up. A cultural pattern, actually, that we see throughout TikTok and YouTube these days, where men are asked to achieve greatness first just to earn basic reverence later. Meanwhile, a woman can publicly downplay the man she married, then return years later with a polished explanation and somehow still float above the moment like she is the tender one. No, ma'am, not today. Have a seat, because the audience heard what it heard. They heard a wife making sure nobody thought she was too impressed. They heard a woman, or a woman rather, not women, but although this is clearly an issue that we see with women everywhere these days. They heard a woman protecting her ego in plain sight. They heard that old familiar modern girl anthem. I may have chosen him, but let the record show I was never dazzled by him. And that, my love, is the gag, because you built a life with a man, you made babies with the man, you built an empire beside the man, but you still needed one little decorative sentence to remind the room that your standards were oh so lofty. Lofty where, Porky? At 14, with a no athletes policy? I mean, are you kidding me? You're not fooling anyone, baby. That sounds less like discernment and more like a middle school manifesto written in glitter gel pen. Oh my God. And now here we are, years later, still unpacking it because disrespect ages badly, especially when it's attached to a man the public can plainly see had value all along. And if you think that we think you didn't know that at 14, you're an idiot. His father is Del Curry. You knew all along this young man came from good stock, and you knew you were never going to get better. So, no, I don't think this is the crime of the century, Aisha. No, I don't think this means that you hate him. No, I do not think every awkward comment is abuse. Let's stay intelligent here. But what I do think is that it reveals something ugly in common. Some women are deeply invested in never appearing too lucky to have a good man. And that sucks. That is it. That is my sermon. That is the sting. You can love him, you can marry him, you can build with him, you can praise him, but heaven forbid anyone think you were impressed too soon. And that is why the clip lingers, because buried under the correction, buried under the smiling explanation, where you look dumb as hell, by the way, buried under the soft language was still the same old impulse to keep the upper hand in the story, even if it means shaving a little dignity off of your husband on the way there. And baby girl, that is not cute. That is not quirky. That is not harmless. That is ego in a cocktail dress. And that dress may be gorgeous, but the ego still stinks. If you made it to the end, you already know what to do. Like the video, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next upload. And if you really rock with Smell the Roses, consider becoming a member and support the channel directly. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one.